it going? Doing all right? Which one? What was it? Oh. You talk. That's a true story for the most part. I might have exaggerated a little bit here and there, but that's. We'll get started here in about 3 minutes, guys. We'll let people kind of come trickling in. You keep talking, keep doing your thing. The sign-in sheet is not going around yet, Carol. I had an official thing I was going to do with the sign-in sheet. At the official beginning of group, I will talk about the sign-in sheet.
Excuse me. When you put this on Facebook, how long does it stay there?
It'll be there on my page for good.
Good.
You'll be able to find it anytime you go on there. And then I'll post on my YouTube channel too.
Do you go by date?
Well, you just got to scroll back so it's most recent. So if you went on tonight, it would probably be the most recent thing on my personal page, just under Richard Jones.
Do you know where Butler, Pennsylvania is?
I do.
Are you close to there?
No, I'm not far from there at all.
I've got a friend who lives up there.
Okay, cool. I did a lot of work there.
I've never seen so many bars in my life.
Isn't Butler?
Yeah, every hill in that valley got bar.
Yep. Shout out to Favor Anderson. I just got a text from him. When? The last time I did this just shut off. Like the video shut off halfway through. So, all right, guys, we're gonna get the show on the road. We'll start a little early. So Carol doesn't get anxious, I'm going to pass around the sign-in sheet. If you don't mind, give us your name, phone number, email. Here's another thing. Okay, so I cannot put your email on our newsletter list unless you indicate that you want it. Okay, so it's just an anti-spam policy that's out there. So if you want to get our newsletter, if you could just put a yes next to your name or an asterisk or something like that that indicates you do want the newsletter, and then we can get you put into our distribution list. So I'll start this over here. If you're already getting the newsletter, and you would know whether you were getting it, we send it out at least once a month. If you're already getting it, don't bother with that. But if you're new or if you haven't been getting it, again, we have to have an indication that you want it before we put it in there. All right, so my name is Rick. Also what I do, guys, is I record this and I put it on my Facebook page, and so this will also be posted if anybody wants to see it afterward. It won't have the PowerPoint or anything like that, but it'll hear what I have to say about these topics. So we do these groups differently. Like 1 week we'll have an open share where it's kind of an open discussion, and then the following week we alternate with some education, just some information, that kind of thing. So we're glad to have you here tonight. I see a lot of new faces. I'll try to go over some of the basics as we go through. If you're looking for the restrooms, or through that door to the right. Coffee should be in the kitchen, that kind of thing. So again, a little bit about who I am. Somewhere in here I have all my credentials listed. This is kind of who I am professionally, guys. So I'm a therapist. I've worked in the drug and alcohol and mental health world for about 18 years. And a lot of different settings: inpatient drug and alcohol rehabilitation, outpatient community mental health, that kind of thing, recovery housing. And I'm also a person in long-term recovery myself. I've been in recovery for 18 years. I started working in the field shortly after I got into recovery, basically because I knew that I couldn't continue to do the job that I had before I entered into recovery, because the job that I had involved a lot of networking, which just really for me meant getting hammered with people. That's a joke. Let's loosen it up here tonight. Let's understand, we're going to joke a lot tonight. This is a tough subject to laugh about. This is a tough subject to smile about, but we're going to joke a little bit tonight. We're going to try to keep it light. At any rate, I went back and I got my master's degree, became a therapist, that kind of thing. Went on and got some additional credentials. I'm also a family member. I've dealt with this on all different levels. I'm a child. I dealt with this in my family when I was growing up. I've dealt with some things as an adult. I've dealt with some things with my kids, and so I kind of know both. I know sort of the theoretical end of it or the academic end of it, and I also know the lived end of it. And tonight, I pick a subject. So I picked two subjects for tonight. One is this idea of letting go. You hear people talk about that a lot. You know, you just need to step back and you need to let go. Or you need to detach, and you can't control the situation. You can't do anything about it. So you just got to step off and try to take care of yourself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And then I'm also going to talk about co-occurring disorders, mainly because I'm on a co-occurring disorder kick. Because I believe that you have to get both these issues addressed. Ideally, you have to get both these issues addressed. What do I mean? Mental health and substance use. Now, we can't always have it that way because it's not always possible. It's very expensive to get somebody into a facility that does both mental health and substance use disorders. But can you piece it together? Can you find ways to get it done as much as possible? So that's what I was going to talk about tonight. And then if you have anything, guys, along the way, please raise your hand and ask questions. And just, we can go in whatever direction you need to or whatever direction you want to. All right. So also a couple more things before we get started tonight. So this group is an educational group. It's meant to be mutual support. It's not meant to be a therapy group. And it's certainly not meant to replace your therapist or your psychiatrist. You know, continue to see them, listen to them. I forgot that it said that. Unless they suck. No, what that means is you're allowed to fire your therapist, you're allowed to fire your doctor, you're allowed to find other people. It's my personal take on the world. You might talk to 10 other people and they might tell you 10 different things about this issue, about these issues. This is my take on the world based on my experience, based on my personal professional experience. And you don't have to follow what I say. This is very important. You want to take the information that I give you tonight and you want to put it through your individual circumstance. Does that make sense to everybody in this room? The details are very important. I think one of the things where we get wrong sometimes in this field is we kind of stand up in front of groups like this and we talk with a broad brush and we say this is what you have to do and this is what you don't have to do and you should do this and you should do that. And I think that that's dangerous. Everybody's situation is very, very unique. So take what I have to say tonight and put it through your own template. Put it through your own situation. Ask yourself, how does it apply to what you're dealing with? And really it's just about my philosophy and our approach here at Favor. That's what we'll go through. All right, so let's talk about letting go. We can turn these too a little bit if people need to see. How many people, by a show of hands, have heard this whole idea of letting go? If you've been in family recovery, you probably have been told that, right? So you're dealing with a situation, you're dealing with a frustration, you're dealing with a loved one. Turn this so you guys can see too. You're dealing with a loved one who might be using, they might be using at a level that makes you very, very frightened, at a dangerous level. I mean, in today's world, that's not hard to get to a dangerous level, right? And you're talking to people about trying to find a way to help or what should I do? And people will tell you, you just need to step off. You need to let them hit bottom. You can't really do anything. You got to let the consequences fall where the consequences may fall. You've heard that, right? All right, so the first thing I want to do is talk about that and talk about the reality of that. You're likely, if you're just getting exposed to this conversation, you're likely to hear people say that to you, and you're likely to think to yourself, that's ridiculous, I can't do that. And you know what? That's okay. You probably should be thinking that. And so we're not going to talk about it in length tonight. If you have questions about the specifics, we can go through it. But I would suggest, if you're just at the beginning of this process, that you use some of the additional supports we have available at Favors, specifically this 24-hour crisis line, to make some phone calls and see whether or not you can do an intervention, to see whether or not you can do some things to get your loved one to a higher level of care, or to get your loved one to step into some type of recovery process. You get that? I'm going to talk about letting go tonight, but you may not be at a point where you want to let go. It's likely that you're kind of halfway in between. You probably theoretically get this idea of detachment. You probably theoretically get this idea of I need to let them hit bottom or let the consequences fall where they may, and then your heart says no. So I want to make that clear. You may want to make a phone call, and you may want to check into this. All right, so this idea of letting go and letting God, what is that all about? Where does that come from? Really, it's a way to try to do your life, to have a life worth living, even if you're dealing with an unacceptable circumstance, a great deal of worry, that kind of stuff, a great deal of anxiety. Does that make sense? That's essentially what the idea of letting go is. To try to turn this over, to try to release this so that it doesn't ruin your day, so that it doesn't ruin your life. Let's just take, for example, somebody, the drinking is the issue. The person is drinking, they continue to drink, it continues to get worse, and your mood on any given day is completely dictated by how they're doing. And we've talked about that in here before. One of the interesting phenomenon that happen with family members is you'll say to them, "How are you doing?" And they'll tell you how their loved one's doing. So you'll say, "How are you doing?" And you'll say, "Rich is doing pretty good. He's in rehab." That's not what I asked, Mrs. Jones. I asked, "How are you doing?" So letting go is all about trying to have your own life separate from how your loved one's doing. That's what this is all about. And really, I talk a lot about worry, and you could probably get a little bit more fancy than that, but I really feel like it comes down a lot to like worry, preoccupation, never being able to let go of that situation. It just pops in your mind. You'll hear people talk about, I'll be driving down the road and all of a sudden it'll pop in my mind. I've heard people say, I wasn't worrying all day, then I remembered I didn't worry, so I started worrying. So I talk a lot about worry, and I have to tell you guys, I have a lot to worry about. If you know that I have 7 kids. That's a freaking lot of worry, right? That's sort of a joke, but no, it's not. These are all my crew. I got 3 adult children. That's enough worry in and of itself, right? And if that's not enough, I have 4 younger children, ages 11 to 5. All right, so you got, this is my wife and I up in the corner. This is my son Nathan. He lives in Texas, or excuse me, he just moved to Pennsylvania. This is Elizabeth and Megan, and then this is the younger crew down here. So, in our lives, I will go on the record and tell you this. There's nothing perfect about our lives. There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of struggles. There are health issues. There are, school-related issues. All kinds of different things pop up. And so I can relate to being preoccupied, especially with my kids. Especially with my kids. Now, I haven't had, knock on wood, I haven't had to deal with this in a spouse. I personally have not had to deal with a spouse who was in active addiction. My wife went through this with me, obviously, and so she knows what it's like to have to worry about that end of it. I talk from my experience a lot about parents to children, but I don't think, it's not unique to parents to children. It also could be spouses. It enters into your mind and it becomes like a hamster on a wheel. And it'll ruin your day if you're not careful. It'll ruin your night if you're not careful. I don't know how many people have woken up at night and not been able to fall back asleep because their mind gets activated. Just like boom, from one topic to the other. And so that's what we want to talk about. How do we let go? And I'm going to throw you out kind of like my model or my ideas around how we let go. The first thing is we have to kind of, for lack of a better term, we have to make a decision and we have to accept the circumstances at some point. It's going to be very hard to let go unless we get to a point where we're really able to look at what we're dealing with and call it what it is, and then try to come into some kind of level of understanding with that. If not, you're probably going to avoid taking care of yourself. You're probably going to avoid entering into your own recovery program or entering into anything that resembles a recovery program because you don't really believe that it is what it is. So we talked in here before about family recovery. There is a stage of family recovery, or there is a stage that families go through. They go through denial. Would you guys agree with that? And you may have gone through that yourself. It's likely that you did go through it. You may be in the middle of it right now. You may be uncertain with what your loved one's dealing with. I'm going to talk about the criteria and talk about what substance use disorder is, hopefully give you a little bit of clarity to that. But if you're going to work on yourself, would you guys agree at some point in time you have to come to a level of acceptance of, this is a substance use disorder, this is what I'm dealing with. And then you get into this idea of turning it over. How many people have heard the term turn it over? This is very much a 12-step term. It applies to people in recovery. It also applies to family members in recovery. Turn it over to a higher power, right? And I'm going to talk about what that looks like. You know, what if you have a higher power, what does turning it over look like? And if you don't have a higher power, because I believe you can turn it over without a higher power, you can still turn it over, and what that looks like. The third aspect is managing stress. So you have to learn how to let it go, but there's also, even if you let it go, guys, you're still going to feel the stress of the situation. You're still going to feel the physical consequences of staying up all night. You're still going to feel, you're going to have high blood pressure, all the issues associated with dealing with chronic worry. Even if you start to work on turning it over, they're still going to be there. So managing stress is a big part of this process. Managing worry, of course, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last area, and some people would say this doesn't have anything to do with turning it over. I think it does, would be setting boundaries and trying to manage boundaries. Because I believe setting boundaries can help you with turning it over, because if you're setting boundaries, you're not going to be continuously triggered and continuously thrown into hysteria around the situation. You guys get where I'm coming from? Like sometimes to turn it over, you actually have to have distance from the situation. Because being too close to it will push you over the edge. Getting a phone call in the middle of the night will push you over the edge. Watching somebody self-destruct will push you over the edge. So we're going to talk about those. This is just sort of the 5 areas I focus on. Am I missing anything? Would anybody add anything to that? I really said that only so I could take a drink. All right. So prayer. Let's start with the if you believe in God, if you believe in a higher power, whatever that higher power may be. So let's just start from that point of view. I would imagine if you're going to turn it over, if you're really going to effectively turn it over, and it's not just a cliche, that you probably have to have some clarity in your mind or some framework for what that's all about and why you would bother with that. Where I think people get in trouble with the idea of turning it over is when they approach it just like a slogan, or just sort of like they feel like they're going to check a box and I'm going to turn it over. I don't think you can turn it over unless you have an idea of like, how does that work? Why would you turn it over? So what's your story behind turning it over? You guys get this? Like, so for example, people would say everything happens for a reason. People would say things like, my child is actually a child of God. People would say things like, I have faith that he has a plan. Do you follow this? You want to get clear on that and start thinking about that and working that around in your mind, because I would imagine it's going to be very hard to turn it over from a higher power point of view unless you have an idea of what that looks like. And this gets into a lot of stuff that we're not going to go into deep here tonight, but it's a reality of the family recovery process. It's a reality of the recovery process, and that's the spiritual side of this whole thing. You know, do you believe in God, and what is your belief on what happens with prayer? And you can ask yourself that question, and it doesn't have to be related to addiction, right? It could be related to any kind of an issue. When you turn it over, what you're doing is, from a higher power standpoint, you're literally saying, like, here it is, it's yours. Does anybody have any experience with that they would be willing to share? Does anybody want to talk about whether or not they think that's helpful? This is a safe place. You can say that it isn't. Does anybody feel like they will be willing to share on that topic? And if not, that's okay. Yes?
That was something hard for me to do, turning over. I'm Catholic, so turning over to God, everybody told me to do that, but that's hard when it's your child.
Yes.
But I got to the point where the stress affected me to the point where my hair fell out, half my head.
So you got to a point where you almost had no choice.
Yeah, and at that point I was like, I have to. I mean, I believe in prayer, but again, it's hard to do. And once I did that, of course, then my health came back.
So you get into the...
It's hard to do, though. It's your
Well,
job.
and so the actual mechanics of turning it over, if you believe in a higher power. So, because I think this is important. And again, I'll speak from a person in recovery, because we're told the same thing about all kinds of different situations. Accept it, turn it over, give it over to God, that kind of thing. And I used to hear people say that to me, and this is just how I'm wired. It's not because I was trying to be a contrarian or I was trying to be argumentative or anything like that. It's just I'm wired a certain way. I didn't understand what that meant. You got to tell me how to do that. Do you guys follow me? And then when I would say, tell me how to do that, they would say, just turn it over. And I would say, well, tell me how to do that. And they say, you just got to turn it over. And how do you do that? And so this is what I've come to understand. And this is sort of like how I turn it over. So the first thing is I believe in a prayer routine. And you'll hear people talk about this a lot in recovery. A prayer routine where you sort of start your day and you end your day. Again, these are just suggestions, guys. These are just ideas, throwing it out. So that's the first part of it, where you're sort of, and you're not necessarily praying for somebody to win the lottery or anything like that, but you're sort of saying some type of prayer. There's no right or wrong type of prayer, like, please look over so-and-so, please help me stay clean and sober today, those type of things. And then at the end of the day, thanking God for a clean and sober day, thanking God for the day, that kind of thing. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it would be in the moment. And I actually think that like the in the moment stuff might be the more important part of the process. The in the moment stuff would be as you're going through your day and this stuff starts to ride you. You guys know what I mean by that? And you'll talk to people and they have certain periods of time during the day that are worse than others. So there are some people that say that when they first wake up in the morning, it just jumps all over them. Like as soon as they get up, it's kind of like their feet hit the ground and like boom, they're ruminating on this issue. Other people would say they're okay in the morning. It's nighttime. Nighttime is horrible. I lay down to go to bed and all I do is start thinking about this issue. It's going to be probably different for different people. The other aspect is it's highly likely it'll just pop. You'll be doing your thing. You'll be at work. You'll kind of be focused, doing what you got to do, productive, and then boom, all of a sudden you're preoccupied with what's going on. And I think that's a part of the process where you got to turn it over again. And you're going to have to develop some kind of mantra. This is what I believe. Dear God, please remove this from me. Dear God, please remove this from me. I've said in here before, I had this prayer I would say when I wanted to drink, when I thought of drinking, dear God, please remove this thought from me. Dear God, please remove this thought from me. Over and over and over and over again. And I bet you I said it 1,000 times. And that was turning it over. Do you guys get this? That's actually turning it over. Turning it over is not this burning bush experience where we go out and we get the spotted calf. Is that a good one? Yeah. Come on, you got and sacrifice it. And we have this moment where we're like, I am free from my obsession about my child. I am free from my obsession about my husband or my wife. And now I will live happily ever after. That is not how turning it over works. In my experience and in my experience in talking to people, it is an over and over and over again. And the other part of that process, guys, is every time you say that prayer and every time you redirect your thinking, you're literally rewiring your brain. You're rewiring the neural pathways in your brain. And even if you don't believe in prayer, you will start to react differently to situations if you do it over and over and over. Now remember, it's going to take some time. It is going to take some time, and it's going to take some effort, and it's going to have to, you may have to say it 10,000 times before it becomes automatic. And I don't know if anybody here has ever had an experience where they've changed anything or they've changed a habit, but you know how a habit or a behavior goes from something that you have to concentrate on to just an automatic? Over time, it just moves from like this thing where I got to make sure I'm concentrating to like, now I'm just doing it. Now I'm just doing it. Believe it or not, I believe the same thing can happen with this process. Where it'll just sort of, instead of you having to, I remember I had to concentrate so hard and pay attention, like, am I thinking, is this thing triggering me? Is that thing triggering me? That kind of thing. And then, but now it would just be, now I don't even have those thoughts, but then it would just move to like, boom, automatic. And that's kind of what you want to do. And I believe that's the process of turning it over. I don't believe there's anything more to it. I do not believe it's a single incident or a single event that gets you free from these issues. You have to continuously do it. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? There's a couple other things I'll throw out, but anybody else want to weigh in on any ideas around this?
Last week I was sharing about my daughter. This time last year, she was literally homeless and we didn't know where she was. And now this year, she's in a halfway house in Florida and probably could speak at this group. Like, she's amazing. So during that time, every day, every single day, and just like you were saying, but really, I did it at night, in the morning, during the middle of the night. I would say, God, just one more minute, one more hour, one more second, just please find her, let her be okay. I'm not going to accept anything else. And she was okay. And 3 months later, we find her. Literally from May to middle of August. Mm. So I'm not saying everybody's story is going to turn out like that. But every day it was like, oh God, just let her be all right. I just know she's going to be fine. She's going to be fine. Just let me. And I had to do this probably 3 and 4 times a day till that child was arrested and found. And now she's in recovery, and I still do it.
So it's interesting, and thank you for sharing that. If you hear that story, what it is that there was a prayer, and it turned out, for the time being, it turned out okay. What I want you to do is I want you to think of the process of prayer without the result. Do you guys get that? Because the result on the back end is fantastic in this situation, but that's the part that you don't have any control over. And that's the part where you want to start saying to yourself, how can I start to feel better on any given day? And I'm going to pray today, and I'm going to turn this over. Of course I want my loved one to get better. Of course I want that to be the ultimate result. That's why I'm praying for them. But this is really about me having some relief. I think that's a key thing. Because if you hang the power of this process on the result, then it's literally the opposite of what we want you to have, what we want you to do with this. Lisa?
Yeah, and the result of saying a positive prayer and asking God to take it from us and help carry the burden is so much better than if you were to say, what if? Because that's what's so damaging to us, is our brain goes crazy. What if all of these things happen? And that's where so much of the stress. But if you're praying to God in a positive fashion, you're not dealing with all that stress.
So Lisa's talking about, like, so if you're saying a prayer, you're also not running around with the what ifs in your mind. So think about it this way. You'll hear people talk about it. I'm not sure if I agree it's completely like this, but there's definitely something to it. Your brain is not going to necessarily hold 2 independent trains of thought at the same time. So if you're praying, it's going to be harder to go down that what if trail. You guys know what I mean by the what if trail? How about all the scenarios and all the different ways it could wind up? And if this happens, and then that happens, and then so-and-so finds out, and then this happens, and next thing you know, you're up all night trying to figure out how to handle each branch of this worry. So the idea would be that the prayer would actually replace that. The prayer will actually replace that train of worry. Now, an interesting thing, so even if you don't believe, even if that's not your jam, you can also let go from a rational point of view. And that would be more like saying to yourself, there's really nothing else I can do about this situation. If you sit down, and this is going to be very, very unique to your personal circumstances. But if you've been at this for a while and you feel like you've gone round and round with your loved one and you feel like you've tried to get them into treatment, or maybe you have gotten them into treatment and they've taken 1 step forward and 2 steps back, you may get to a point where you're just rationally, you're like, look, I've banged my head against this wall 75 times. I'm not going to bang it against the wall 80 times. I see what's going on here. I can't do anything about this. You'll hear people get to this point. And when people get to the point where they rationally say, like, I can't do anything about this, it's interesting. I feel like there's almost this, in a positive way, sort of this surrender or this resignation of, like, I have tried to figure this thing out. It's like trying to do a Rubik's Cube. Hey, wait, how many people even know what a Rubik's Cube is? You guys don't know it. Okay, so, if you're doing a Rubik's Cube for a while and trying to figure it out, like, all of a sudden, like, you put it down, I'm done with it. And some of these situations that you're dealing with your loved ones, no kidding, it's just as baffling as a Rubik's Cube, right? It's just as baffling, and you can't figure out what to do, and you tried this and you tried that. So you can also just get into this process of letting go. Now, I believe the process in the moment can be the same as prayer, except it doesn't necessarily mean that you're saying, dear God, please remove this thought from me. You're just redirecting your thinking. You're focusing on something else. You're moving away from that worry train. So that's the idea around turning it over. That's the process as far as I know. That's the process the way that I was taught to turn it over. That's the expectations I have when I turn it over. The expectations are not that I will be free and I will walk out of this group tonight and never think about my loved one again or worry about my loved one again. That is not it. It's the hope that you can apply these techniques, and on any given day, in any given circumstance, you can improve your outlook, and you can improve, or maybe a better way would say, you can decrease your distress around the situation. And it's not about, this isn't going to make you happy or euphoric, but the idea is, can it bring you a little bit of serenity where the day goes a little bit better? And that's what we're looking at. And that's the reality of what some of us are dealing with, right? That's the reality of the situation. When we're looking at a circumstance, especially like with adult children or with our spouses, with adults that we can't control, it might be a little bit different with adolescents. Like I've heard a lot of parents of adolescents say, well, I feel like I do have some control. Maybe that is a little bit different. But when you're dealing with another adult, at a certain point in time, you're going to look at the situation and say, that's it. That's all I got for it. It's hard to control another adult, right? Even if drugs and alcohol aren't involved, and even if their thinking isn't involved. Here's an interesting theory. I think about this with my wife. I've never actually won a debate. I have never won an argument with my wife. How is that possible? My record is like 0 and 2,538. So human beings, we tend to what? Dig our heels in. We don't really like to be told what to do in general. Now you add substances to the mix, and what does that do? That compromises our thinking even further. So, as you try to control the situation, and as you try to get the person to do what you want them to do, you're really going to grow frustrated, guys. You're going to grow so frustrated, and the tension will just continue to grow and continue to grow. All right, so that's the idea around turning it over. All right? Any final comments on turning it over, or any little tricks that anyone would want to throw out there? Yes, ma'am.
I would just throw out that what you're basically talking about is working the steps as a narnon. So as an addicted, a relative of an addict, and that's what I've done, and because you first have to realize you have no power over the addict. Then you have to decide that you have a higher power. It doesn't have to be God. It could be your group. It could be, friends. And then from there, you can turn it over. But to me, you've got to follow those steps, and that's kind of like what you're saying.
It's the same general idea. She's talking about 12-step programs. So you have Al-Anon and you have Nar-Anon, or the main 12-step programs. And absolutely, that would be a group that you could go to that would help you through that process. Now, I don't believe you have to do it in that way. I believe you can do it in a wide variety of ways, but I also believe that you're going to have to apply and put some energy and effort into it. And I think where people get themselves in a jam is when they feel like there's some kind of destination to this process, and that you'll arrive and sort of be like just freed up from it. And again, I haven't personally had that experience. And I haven't had that experience as a person in recovery, and I haven't had that as a loved one. Even for us in recovery, right? That's not how it works. We don't get to a finish line. We don't get to a situation where, and I would make an argument that's how life works. I think life, you have to embrace the journey. I don't want to get too philosophical, but you have to embrace the journey. People say all the time that happiness is a byproduct of the process. It's not a destination. That's pretty deep, huh? Getting deep up here. All right. Let's talk about stress, worry, anxiety, those type of things. You guys know that stress is related to 75 different medical conditions are directly exacerbated or caused by chronic stress, ranging from cancer to heart disease, all the mental health issues, depression, anxiety. It's worthwhile for you as a family member, regardless of what's going on with your loved one, to try to learn how to manage your stress, to try to learn how to make your life a little bit better for your own physical health needs. And I know that's counterintuitive. You'll hear people talk about that doesn't make any sense to me. So-and-so, we don't even know where she is. She's living on the street. How can I take care of myself? But you can't help anybody else if you're laid up in the hospital. You can't help anybody else if you drown. And so these are some techniques, and you can get this in a wide variety of places. You can get this through therapy. You can get this through this group. If you went to 12-step family recovery groups, you would get different techniques and different ways of dealing with stress. We do it through a program or a discipline called positive psychology. And these are 2 or 3 different ways of dealing with stress. The first one, PERMA. Those are 5 areas of life that if you take a look at them, they're shown to increase contentment. And I'll go through them. The P stands for pleasure. You got to do something fun. Now again, some of you are sitting there saying, that's insane. I'm not going to go out and do anything fun when my son or my daughter are dealing with this. But you got to do something fun. And this means fun, like literally fun, not a task. Okay? Like fun. Go play paintball. Or go to a movie. Or go play miniature golf. You got to have some fun in your life to decrease stress. The E stands for engagement. Do you have anything in your life where you're totally absorbed in it and you're not thinking about all these problems and all these troubles? You're fully engaged in the moment. So for some people that could be work. For other people they have to find a hobby. You know, some people, you'll hear people talk about hiking and rock climbing, and when they're involved in that, they're completely immersed in the process. You'll hear people talk about woodworking. They're completely immersed in the process. I think the benefits of engagement are pretty obvious, right? You're 100% absorbed. You're not thinking about all that noise in the back of your head. Engagement is also known as flow or being in the zone. How many people have heard of being in the zone? That kind of thing. And time flies by and you're just 100% caught up in the moment. And what happens is when psychologists study that, what they find is that there's a benefit in the moment, an obvious benefit in the moment, but then there's also a payoff that lingers. So in other words, you're in a better mood after you're engaged in something like this. So if you can't find anything, I suggest you go free climb. Because when you're rock climbing, you're not concentrating on anything else. That was a joke, guys, because you're going to die. That's what. All right. The R stands for relationships. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, too. But relationships, and that means quality over quantity. This means eliminating toxic people from your life and trying to bring more positive people into your life. This is a period of time when you guys are dealing with a highly emotional situation, a very, very stressful situation. The last thing you need to have are judgmental people in your life. And you guys, here's one. You don't need these type of people. Have you ever talked to anybody on the phone and they've said to you, I tell you what I would do if that was my kid. Or I tell you what I would do if that was my husband. Those are the people that you want to eliminate from your life. I don't mean eliminate them. Don't go eliminate them. Even though you may want to, that's not what I mean. But you don't want to be, you got too much. Let's picture like a scale of 1 to 10 and your stress level or your frustration level, you're already at a 7. Why do you want to be talking to these folks that are adding to that are cranking you up to an 8 or a 9? And I know we're family. We'll just talk about family for a minute, and I guess it could also be good friends. I know where family's concerned, it's very hard. You can't cut everybody out. Well, let me say it. You've been told you can't cut everybody out. I'm here to tell you, you can cut everybody out. There are people in my family who I will not talk to unless it's 100% on my terms, and they will not hold me hostage. They will not hold me emotional hostage. Now, I didn't handle that well when we got to that point because I went temporarily insane when I confronted them. I don't recommend you do that, but you do not have to stay in a relationship where somebody's banging on you and bringing you down over and over again. You got too much going on, you got too much on your plate. And then the opposite of that would be what? Find people who lift you up. Find people who lift you up. You may find people who lift you up in a group like this. You may find people who lift you up at church. You may find people who lift you up in your family. You may find good friends who lift you up. You want to be around more positive people. So that's what the R stands for. The M stands for meaning, and I'm going to talk about that. People tend to have less stress whenever they can tap into this idea of like, why am I here? It's beyond just me. And, higher power type stuff, faith. Another thing you'll hear people talk about, and again, counterintuitive when you're dealing with your own crisis, is sometimes people feel better when they volunteer, for example. And they tap into this idea that there's more to the world than me. And the A stands for attitude. We can choose our response to any given situation. And when you add those up, this is universal across all cultures, across all society. These are the factors that lead to, it's not called happiness. They don't call it happiness anymore. The psychologists call it subjective well-being. Happiness implied too much of a giddiness. That's not what happiness is, guys. Happiness is not like, yippee, let me do cartwheels. Happiness or contentment or subjective well-being, everything's okay. Everything's okay. The free 3 is another technique or tool that you can put in your toolbox today. You can start this tomorrow. There are 3 things that research has shown reduces stress, reduces anxiety, and reduces suffering. One is go outside. Try to spend time outside every day. Ideally, you get some time, you go out, you go for a walk, but even if you go outside and you're at work and you're able to go around the building or something like that, go outside. The second is laugh. Laugh. And the third is music. Get a soundtrack for your life. Now, obviously, you want to use upbeat music. I suggest, like what I'm into right now is like late 80s, early 90s East Coast rap. As you guys would probably guess, right? But that's just me. That doesn't have to be what you guys go for. So what happens in all those cases is it changes your outlook. It sort of changes your mood. It brings you up a little bit. And if you do this, if you did this for 30 days, what you'll find is that you'll be in better spirits. You might not be happy. You might not be giddy. It might not be great, but you'll be in better spirits. And then the final one is making meaning out of suffering. And that's, there's a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It was written by Viktor Frankl. He was in a Nazi concentration camp, and he later developed this type of therapy called logotherapy or existential therapy, and it's this idea of how do people in the world, so suffering is universal. There's none of us, no human being on this planet will escape suffering. Can you guys get down with that idea? Even all the people you see on Facebook and Instagram all polished up, right? You know what I'm talking about, all the twinkly people? Do you know that there's a thing that's going on right now on a side note? I got it sent to me in one of my counselor magazines, that people are going to plastic surgeons with their selfies and saying, I want to look like this. You know how you get filters on your selfies? They're going to their plastic surgeons and say, can you make me look like this? What's the world coming to? But at any rate, like, suffering is universal. It may not be related to drug and alcohol addiction. It may be related to other issues. It may be related to your own personal suffering around some kind of health issue. It may be in other family members. How can you make meaning out of that? How can it become more than that? And this is where, like, this is the deep stuff. This is where you do have to get into your faith, and you have to get into what do you believe and why are we here type questions. And can you find a purpose around that? Can you find a greater calling around those issues? You'll find people who've like, let's talk about grief for a minute. People who've lost somebody, who, when they kind of like throw themselves into a project or they throw themselves into some type of greater calling, that they tend to do better than people who don't. Because what's happening is you're putting a stake in your ground and you're saying, like, this is not going to ruin me. That despite this, I'm going to try to rise above this, and I'm going to try to help other people. It may not be helping other people in the specific thing that you're dealing with. It could be helping other people in all kinds of different ways. It could also just be learning about it and understanding that you're going to have to focus on that. So we're dealing with a really, really difficult stuff. Like, we're sitting here, we're dealing with really, really difficult stuff. We're dealing with addiction. Addiction is a chronic meaning it never goes away. Relapsing, meaning that the common thing is that it comes back. So it's chronic, it never goes away. It comes back in ultimately fatal disease. Okay? That has a lot of horrible things that happen in the meantime. Now, there is recovery and there is hope, and if people engage in recovery, about 70% of people who engage in recovery will eventually find long-term recovery. Okay, so there is absolutely hope, but the reality of the situation that you're in, you're going to have to. You have one of two choices. It can crush you. It can crush you. This will crush you. It'll put you in bed. You won't go out. You will isolate yourself. You won't want to see anybody at church. You won't want to see anybody at the supermarket. You won't want to talk to anybody. You'll be embarrassed. You'll be ashamed. You'll be stigmatized. Or you can find a way to rise above it and lift yourself up out of it. It's kind of like that fundamental. Now, I think that there's a process in the middle where you sort of figure that out. Would you guys agree with that? I don't think anybody goes from hearing about this. It's like any other disease or any other issue. Once you're diagnosed, you don't go from like 0 to 60. You typically learn about it. And you typically learn about what you're dealing with. But ultimately, you try to like come out the other end and you sort of say to yourself, there's going to be more to this than just these incidents, that kind of thing. I think some of the things that where addiction is concerned anyway, some of the things that get in the way of making meaning out of her. One of the big things is the stigma and the embarrassment and the shame around the term addiction. Okay, and the way that society has characterized and stereotyped people who have this issue. It makes families really, really, really cautious. But what I want to tell you is that it is a brain disorder. And I'm going to show you pictures of the brain to kind of prove it to you tonight. I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit in here. This is a healthcare condition like any other healthcare condition. All right, so those are these factors. Any questions about the positive psychology approach to things? Anybody else have a tool, technique, or little trick they use to lift their spirits on any given day? Okay, that's what I thought. Yes?
I have a 7-year-old grandson, and I just love getting with him. He can really take my mind off of things that are breaking my heart.
So getting around, her comment was being around her 7-year-old grandson. So you would try to more intentionally do that. You would try to concentrate on that, especially if you're having a bad day. And I think that's a really good example. It kind of falls under relationships, but you would seek out those. That's an example of a relationship, even though he's only 7, that pumps you up. So you would want to put more of that in your life. And you want to think about how this applies to your particular situation. All right, so the next aspect of it is, you're kind of trying to deal with worry, you're trying to deal with stress. The third area, or the fourth area, is setting boundaries so that you don't expose yourself to this over and over again. As you start to try to get healthy, as you start to try to move away from this, you might want to start thinking about, like, how do I change my interaction patterns with my loved one who has a substance use disorder? Boundaries it's not about controlling another person. It's not about rules. It's not about consequences for people. It's simply how you want to be treated. That's how you want to think of boundaries. It's not about rules or putting somebody else in a box. It's about, this is how I want to be treated. This is how I'm going to run my life. There's 2 different types of boundaries. There are boundaries for the outside self and boundaries for the inside self. I'm going to talk more about the inside self tonight. The outside self, believe it or not, is usually pretty obvious, and most people are better at setting the outside boundaries. These are the boundaries that are related to property, and this is like people are stealing your stuff, you don't let them stay at your house. You'll find that people are pretty good at this, because those are very obvious things. Sometimes people they still won't set a boundary there, but like, let's say the person takes your car and has crashed your car 3 times, you're probably going to be better, at saying, I'm not going to let you take the car. The part where people struggle is how they want to be treated themselves. They let themselves get taken advantage of. Maybe they let themselves be, I don't know if you've ever had this happen. This happens a lot with addiction. I'm sure you have. And when we're out there and we're doing our things, we tend to say nasty stuff to people, right? Yelling, threatening. Dudes love to punch holes in drywall. I'm not sure what's up with that. Every once in a while you want them to hit a stud though, right? Like, there, you got it now. And I'm going to show you, we're going to go through what happens in the brain and why this might be going on, but you guys have all lived through some version of this. These are inside self boundaries. This is where you start to say to yourself, is this okay for me to be treated this way? Because it's different than this, right? The outside boundaries are obvious stuff. They just stole a bunch of money out of your account. They just stole your, little brother's Xbox and took it to the dope man, that kind of thing. Whatever it might be, that's some obvious stuff, and you'll get fired up about that. What happens here is you write yourself off. You start to tell yourself that you're not important enough to be treated the right way. Why do you do that? Anybody have a theory on why you would do that? Or anybody know what that's called? Come on.
Self-hate.
It's codependency, right?
Yeah.
You're like, literally, you disregard your own feelings. You start to not exist. You become enmeshed in the person. If the person moves, you move. And you ignore your own feelings. And it happens subtly, and it happens over time. It's not like, you wake up on a Wednesday morning and say, I've decided I'm going to take all this crap today. You have to start observing this, guys. You have to start observing how you feel in these situations. I will tell you when it even gets more difficult. It even gets more difficult whenever the violations of inside self boundaries get even harder to recognize. So I'll give you an example of a violation of an inside self boundary that's very hard to recognize. Let's say, you know, your mom and you have a kid, and the kid is in like his maybe mid-20s, that kind of thing, and not abusive to you, nothing like that, but is just literally destroying themselves with their use. Continuing to use, taking all these risks, taking all these chances, and you are watching it unfold, and it's destroying you from the inside out because you're watching it unfold. And you're keeping a relationship with the person. Do you follow me? Well, one of the things you want to consider is whether or not you can handle that relationship. Do you guys get that part? Because we can camp out here and ask some questions, but it's appropriate to set a boundary where you say, I cannot watch you destroy yourself. I cannot. That's where you'll hear people, they'll step off, and you'll hear people say, I can't even handle talking about the weather. I can't even handle talking about, I don't even want to meet you for lunch. Not because I'm trying to be mean, but because it's destroying me. Because every time I leave that interaction, what happens? I just think about it the whole day. Whereas other people can be in those interactions and it's okay. This is one of those things that it's not a universal answer. Do you guys get this? Very important. I'm not telling you that you need to cut off your loved one. What I'm telling you is if it's killing you, you're allowed to cut off your loved one. And also, you'll also find in certain circumstances that maybe mom and dad, for example, will have different ways of dealing with that. And if mom needs to cut off and hold them at arm's length, and dad sometimes, you know, compartmentalize or whatever and can maintain, that's okay too. But this idea is honor your own feelings around these issues. Treat yourself with enough respect to say that I'm not going to keep going back for more. Yes?
Yeah, I got a question. So this is kind of unique. So I know I'm the addict, actually. So I'm trying to understand the other side because I'm killing it in recovery. And I don't know how to set those properly because the things I must earn.
So you have a family member that's setting that the family member setting boundaries on you, or you need to set boundaries.
Still, it's that toxic behavior. Even though I'm doing all I can in recovery,
yeah,
it's still that tug of war. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. So the comment is like you feel like you're doing everything you need to do, but you still feel like you're getting bashed. Yeah. That kind of stuff. I think toxic relationships in general. Let's take addiction out of the equation. Let's just pretend it has nothing to do with it. Toxic relationships, we have to really monitor how we let people treat us. We have to really monitor how we let people treat us, and then you might have to put a distance between the person. Again, it gets really weird. The best example of when it gets weird is with family members, because with family members we will tell ourselves this story that I have to stay connected to so and so because he's my brother or he's my son or my daughter or whatever, my adult kid, whatever it is, and meantime you feel like crap every time you get off the phone with them. You're allowed to say, I'm not talking to you for a while. We're told we're not allowed to do that, right? Like society, who tells us we're not allowed to do that? Yourself? Every institution in America? The Hallmark Channel? Facebook, all these places tell us that like this isn't how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to have everybody's supposed to come together for Thanksgiving and have just enough drama that we're not sure what's going to happen, but at the end it all works out. Okay, that's not how it is in my family, guys. That's not how it is in my family, you know. Everybody comes to dinner and the shit hits the fan, man. Okay? And so, you know, but we think that we got to have it a certain way. We try to live up to these standards and these ideas and this way of doing life that, guys, just does not exist. It doesn't exist, and it's this idealized kind of situation where I'm in recovery now, so now that I'm in recovery, I got to really repair all my relationships, and we're going to have to live happily ever after. That's not how it works, and if you're able to get free from that, if you're able to get in touch with that, it's one of the most liberating things that you can ever do. You know, if you really can like start to live where you're just kind of saying like, what's okay with me? Now again, you have to learn how to do that, right? And there's always a process, and you got to remember, you want to always give people a chance to get it right. This isn't about punishing people, and this isn't about cutting everybody off. You know, sometimes, like especially like in relationships, like marriage or something like that, you need to go to counseling and things like that. But for the most part, you have a right, every one of us in the room have a right to say, this isn't cool with me. I'm not coming back for more. So it happens in families, it happens with friends, it also happens in the workplace. Workplace can get very interesting. There can be very toxic relationships in the workplace. Sometimes people will stay because they got the golden handcuffs on. They have to stay there and they have to put up with it. But again, I would encourage you to kind of like monitor yourself and say, is this okay with me? And where you can adjust, go ahead and adjust. Any other comments about boundaries? All right, so the healthier we are, the more boundaries we set, or the better we are at setting boundaries. Honoring these boundaries, it takes practice. You have to pay attention to what you're doing. It's not going to come natural. If you've never set boundaries in relationships and you go home tonight and you start working on this, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well because it's going to feel really, really weird. I don't know if you've ever had a difficult conversation with somebody in your family or somebody that you love, and maybe you've told them you don't appreciate being treated this way or that way. You get scared. Halfway through, you want to quit. Sometimes you avoid it altogether. It's just, it may not feel, you may have to try it a few times before you get it right. And again, with the addicted person, the idea is to identify that, clearly communicate it, because the other side of it, you're doing it for yourself, but what else could happen is you could also help push them toward their own recovery. If they start to learn that they can't talk like this, or they can't do this, or you're not going to go ahead and put up with this, maybe they start to consider some changes in their own life. That would be the idea around that. All right, so we talked worry. Go through this real quick. We talked about this already. Chain of thoughts just bouncing everywhere. I think I have some techniques for worrying here. Okay, the first thing about worry, do not worry about worry. When you talk to people who wind up having an anxiety disorder, the hallmark symptom of an anxiety disorder is they're literally worried about worry, or they're anxious about their anxiety. So worry is completely normal. It's very normal. It's an evolutionarily healthy thing to do. People who were not worried back in the day got eaten or stomped on by a woolly mammoth. Another technique that's been shown to work is set aside time to worry. I know that sounds weird, but you'll hear people talk about, I'm going to worry after work from 7 to 7:30 every night. And they've done studies where this is actually, especially if you do it the same time every day. You recondition your brain to say, like, that's my worry time. Keeping a pen and paper near the nightstand can sometimes help, where you write down like whatever it is and you say, I'll get to that tomorrow morning, that kind of thing. Watch out for some of the other worries that get thrown in there. We have enough going on. Stay away from news. Stay away from the news in general and all the weird stuff going on out there. The other thing is stay busy. If you're busy and you're kind of like occupied, it's less likely to worry. And then we talked about this already, avoid toxic people. Does anyone else have any techniques for worry? Don't worry about it. Anybody else have any other techniques for worry? Oh, and the other thing is worry does not prevent the bad thing from happening. When they survey people anonymously, they'll find about 90% said, if I don't worry about it, it's more likely to happen. We know that that's not true, right? You can't prevent the bad thing from happening. Yes?
Some serious exercise. Go swim for a half mile, Lord.
Well, you could chalk that up to what? That could be like stay busy, right? Anything you're doing to distract yourself and occupy your mind is going to make it less likely that you wind up like falling into that worry trap. All right. So, this is just a shameless plug for me. That's my Facebook page and my blog. Get on there and subscribe. All right. So let's talk about some of these co-occurring issues. All right. So we got about a half an hour, 35 minutes. We talked about how to let go. Another way of letting go is increasing your knowledge around what you're dealing with. Would you agree with that? Any issue that you're dealing with. Now you got to be careful. Today you can Google everything. If you Google the wrong thing, you'll have, malaria. Be careful. But the more you know, maybe the better you feel. So this is kind of like, this is how this is related. And I'm going to talk about co-occurring disorders tonight. And so recovery applies to co-occurring disorders. Recovery applies to mental health issues and substance use issues. This is the definition that the federal government gives to recovery, a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to fulfill their full potential. As you can see, the definition it's not specific to drug and alcohol. So the way the world is kind of moving is toward this more holistic way of thinking. And what we find is about 60%, maybe more, but at least 60% of folks with a substance use disorder report having some kind of co-occurring mental health issue. And many times when people start their journey with this, they won't be sure what they're dealing with, or their family won't be sure what they're dealing with. And so you'll see sometimes they wind up, getting sent to a psychiatrist or getting sent to, a mental health professional or a therapist. And I've had situations, a lot of situations where people have come in and see me and they don't know what's up and what's down, and families don't know what they should be doing and where they should be sending them and that kind of thing. So it's very, very common. And so learning about this may help wrap your mind around it. All right, so this is the definition of a co-occurring disorder. It's a condition where there's one or more substance use disorders and one or more mental health disorders. And I'm going to go through and give you some examples of that as we go through. It's very, very common. It's being pushed. We're trying to pay special attention to it more than ever. There used to be a school of thought that, like, if it was a drug and alcohol issue, you go over and you go to the rehab and that's all you deal with, and we're not going to worry about your depression. We're not going to worry about your anxiety. But that's not the case anymore. People are trying to work hard to try to get these things addressed. Now, there aren't a lot of facilities that do it together. There just aren't. So what you wind up doing is you wind up piecing it together. So you wind up doing your drug and alcohol over here and seeing a psychiatrist over here, that kind of thing. All right, so let's start with the drug and alcohol definition. We've gone through this before, but this is all from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 5th edition. This is the book that's used to diagnose and kind of officially say what's going on, and you kind of come in and you see me and I go through these questions with you and I try to establish whether or not you have a substance use disorder, right? Driven by insurance companies because you got to have a diagnosis. We don't do this at Faber. We don't try to diagnose you at Faber, that kind of thing. We don't care what you got going on. We want you to come in. We don't care if you're a family member. We don't care what stage you're on this process. But this is the criteria. And so if you're dealing with this, you can start asking yourself, does your loved one have this? Tolerance is it takes more and more of the substance to get the same effect. I used to catch a buzz with a 6-pack. Now it takes 18 beers, that kind of thing. Withdrawal. When I don't have the substance in my body, I get sick. When I put the substance in my body, the sickness goes away. Okay? Opioid, for example, you feel dope sick. But as soon as you take a pill, it goes away. Craving and preoccupation is an internal process. You think about it all day. Can't cut back. You make rules for yourself. I'm only going to drink on the weekends, and you can't stick to that. Can't control. You were only going to drink 4 beers and drank 44 beers. And you woke up in Las Vegas with Mike Tyson and a tiger. If you've been coming to this group, I make that joke all the time. Interpersonal issues. People are mad at you about it. You're struggling with your girlfriend. You're struggling with your wife, that kind of thing. Avoiding non-using activities. You only go to places where it's a party. You're not going to your niece's birthday party unless they're having, some substances. Great deal of time. It's a full-time job. Use despite physical and psychological dangers. Now, we've really started to talk about this different. There are certain substances that if you're using, you're automatically meeting that criteria. So heroin, for example, if you're using heroin, you automatically meet that criteria because you're playing Russian roulette every time you use because of some of these dangerous substances that are being cut. Use in physically hazardous situations, drinking and driving. Role failure, you can't show up for work, you can't show up for school. If you get 6 or more of those criteria, you technically meet the criteria for substance use disorder severe. The word addiction does not appear in the medical literature. Get that? It's actually substance use disorder severe, and whatever the substance was would go at the beginning of that. Alcohol use disorder severe, cannabis use disorder severe, opioid use disorder severe, whatever it may be. So that's how it would work. It's an inexact science, right? One of the problems with our field is it's not like taking high blood pressure and saying here's your high. It's not like taking an X-ray and saying you have a broken leg. It's an inexact science, and it's very hard to convince somebody who's dealing with this that they're actually dealing with this. That's one of the hardest parts of the process. Now that's on the substance use end, and it's all about this neurotransmitter called dopamine. So what happens is when you do anything pleasurable, your brain releases dopamine. Whenever you drink water when you're thirsty, when you eat whenever you're hungry, whenever you have a good conversation, dopamine is released. When you put substances in your body, an inordinate amount of dopamine is released. So it just floods your brain with dopamine. And what happens to some of us is over time, the brain will shut off the production of dopamine because it's dangerous. It's analogous to the pancreas shutting off the production of insulin where diabetes is concerned. And that's what you have going on in this PET scan. So this is kind of like normal brain functioning, and this is somebody who has any substance, any chronic substance use. And what you can see there is that if you can't experience a normal day and you can't experience anything that's okay, what are you going to do? You're going to compulsively chase the substance to try to replace that. And so that's when it moves from boys will be boys, we're just having a good time, maybe I get a little bit out of control, and to something different, right? And all the things that make you guys scratch your heads. Why would they continue to do that? Why would he continue to use when he's going to lose his family? Why would he continue to use when he's going to lose his job? Why would she continue to use whenever it's that dangerous? Because you're not dealing with somebody who's of sound mind at that point. There's no decision making going on. Do you guys get that? Now, this isn't making an excuse for anybody. This isn't to say that Rich wasn't responsible for his behaviors. I was responsible for my behaviors. But it's to try to make you guys aware that if you're dealing with somebody in this state of mind, you're not going to talk them out of anything, probably. It's going to be very hard for them to access the part of their brain that allows them to analyze what's going on. And so, and these are all just slides, your brain on drugs. How many people remember the your brain on drugs commercial with the egg? That was highly effective, wasn't it? All the 1980s just say no stuff did not work on me. They used to have the one commercial where the kid was walking down the street and there was a guy in the alley and he was like, psst, psst, hey kid, you want some drugs? And the kid ran away. We would be like, why doesn't that ever happen to us? That never happened. I never in my life ever had that happen. And I don't know if I've ever actually talked to anybody who ever had that happen. And then the good news is, guys, once you enter into recovery, you do get better. So this is not a permanent condition. Let's go on a record. That is not a permanent condition. As you enter into recovery, you kind of come back online, that kind of thing. People say, how long does it take? A lot of factors involved in that, how old you are whenever you enter into recovery, what the substance was, but you do get better. So it is not a permanent condition. And that's, all the recovery programs help with it getting better, all right? So that's the substance use end. Any question on the substance use end? You guys have heard a lot about that. All right. So we know that on the mental health end, that it's more common than not that somebody will also come into this process with a co-occurring mental health issue, a diagnosis. The most common diagnosis we see at Faber Greenville is anxiety disorders and depression. Okay, probably followed by bipolar disorder. The truth is, underlying it all is probably trauma, if you really get down to it. But if you looked at somebody's chart, we don't look at people's charts, but if you just talk to them, what did the professionals say? It's probably going to be anxiety and depression. And you're going to hear a lot about anxiety. I wanted to start off by talking about anxiety. You may have heard this from your loved one. And they may have wound up with a diagnosis of anxiety. It's very, very common. Now, the idea of why would anxiety and substance use be so closely tied, pretty obvious stuff, right? If you're suffering from an anxiety disorder and putting these substances in your body gives you relief, then you have a higher payoff than a person who doesn't. So not only do you have what's going on in your brain, you also have this, that may be the only time you're able to relax. Or depression, the same thing. Let's say you have depression, it's the only thing that can get you out of bed. And then obviously escaping from trauma. So how do we think about it at Faber Greenville? All right, so there's different ways to think about what's going on. So some people would say that both these issues are coming from a common factor in the brain. If you're born with a predisposition for substance use disorder, you're also born with a predisposition for mental health. It's kind of like the two things go together. That's what's happening. I don't believe that, but that's one model that's out there. The truth is no one knows exactly what's going on. The other model is that the psychiatric issue leads to the substance use. This is the most common one you'll hear people talk about. Have you ever heard the term self-medicating? He was self-medicating, she was self-medicating. That's what this is all about. So I'm anxious and I start smoking weed and it kind of like takes the anxiety off and then I'm drawn to go back and do more, and so the psychiatric issue leads to the substance use issue. It's very hard to tell which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Very, very hard to tell. The only way you can really tell is if you do a very, very comprehensive assessment and the person is able to target when the anxiety started. And if the anxiety started before the onset of use, then you can make an argument that it was this. Do you guys get that? So, I was always anxious, and, I remember when I was 12, I started seeing a counselor, I started seeing a child counselor, but I didn't pick up substances until I was 16. Then you can make an argument that that's what's going on. Many times that, it's very hard to tell because both these issues start to happen in adolescent, young adult. The other idea is the substance use causes a psychiatric issue. So, yes, Frank?
There's something in the AA Big Book that says, drinking didn't make me who I am made me drink. So I think
Which might be talking about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, absolutely. The other issue is that I've drank so much, I've done so many drugs, I've kind of changed my brain, and I've also ruined my life. So I'm pretty depressed. My life has become a country music song. The dog left, the truck's, again, a joke, guys. So you should be depressed, Rich. Your life is pretty depressing. That's this model, right? At Favor Greenville, here's what we encourage families to think about and what we encourage people to think about that are dealing with this. Stop trying to figure out which came first, the chicken or the egg. Okay? Don't worry about which came first, the chicken or the egg. Don't try to put more primacy on one over the other. Can you get both these situations looked at the same time? Ideally, that would happen under one roof. The truth is, guys, there are very, very, very few places that are doing it under one roof. So we have a lot of folks who come here and they're getting their drug and alcohol issues addressed here. This is really common. You come in here, you go into groups every day, maybe you're seeing a recovery coach, maybe you're going to AA, maybe you're going to NA. We would encourage them at the same time to seek out psychiatric support and not wait, right? Because the danger is they will sometimes be told, wait until you have 90 days to go get this looked at. Wait until you have a year in recovery to go get this looked at. We would not encourage that. We would say go and see somebody immediately, and there's nothing wrong with getting these things addressed at the same time. And so what do you have to do in the reality of the world in Greenville, South Carolina? What's the reality of the situation? You're not going to find a place that does this. So we have to try to help you with that as a recovery coach, as recovery coaches. You have to try to get information. You have to try to get an appointment at a psychiatrist and an appointment maybe at a mental health therapist while they're doing this stuff along with it. The other thing is you also have to go back to this idea of letting go because your loved one may not go for all that. Right? I mean, how many different therapists do you want me to see? How many different people do you want me to talk to? There's also the reality of you may not get them to do that. But in an ideal world, that's what would be going on. And we would be kind of communicating.
I have a question.
Yes.
In regards to referring out to a psychiatrist, for example, for somebody that has suffered from what they say is anxiety, but in actuality it was probably the use, in our son's case, of the drugs causing more anxiety.
Yeah.
So if we say there's a psychiatric co-occurring disorder, and we refer them out to a psychiatrist, what is the chance that that psychiatrist is going to prescribe a benzodiazepine, which started the whole...
Well, so that's a great question. So sometimes there's definitely a reality that if you get the person to the wrong psychiatrist who doesn't know the history or who doesn't understand addiction, that it could actually make everything worse. And that's a consideration you have to take. Because there will be some people who will say, I'm not sending them because of that risk. Right. And that's okay, I get that. That's just a reality of the situation. If you ask us, we could probably point you toward people that are less likely to do that. The reality of medication for anxiety, the reality is that there's plenty of medication that is not psychoactive, that is not a mood or mind-altering drug. So you can go to, and you can do things like Zoloft and Luvox and stuff like that. And Wellbutrin is a new drug that's being used for anxiety. It's not going to work like Xanax, and it's not going to work like we want it to, right? Like when I used to be on Xanax, like, come on, doc, you're telling me you're going to give me this other drug that's going to take three weeks to build up in my system? Give me a Xanax, I'll be good to go, right? So it's not going to work like that, but that's not what you're looking for when you're trying to deal with anxiety. What you're looking for is to be able to function through the day and not have it ruin you. It's not going to go away altogether. The other thing is that this doesn't mean it has to be medication. This could be talk therapy. This could be, exercise. This could be, do you guys get that? Mm-hmm. Like when people see this, the danger, if we did this presentation to people who were seeking recovery, is they would think this automatically means I got to go get on meds. That's not what this means. It may mean that. It just means you got to concentrate on that part of your life as well. Who knows exactly how that plays out? But I want to highlight something you said. If the person has a history of doctor shopping, let's just put it that way, or if the person has a history of going to psychiatrists and walking out with Xanax, I would say you may not want to do this because the risks outweigh the potential benefits. You get where I'm coming from? And that's where, remember at the beginning when I said your individual situation, you want to take into consideration your individual situation in all these circumstances. So you guys know those histories, and that story that you just told is incredibly common. There's a lot of people. Xanax is like, holy cow, that is the drug here in the upstate. I mean, people talk about the opioid epidemic and that kind of thing, and people say, but in the upstate of South Carolina, the issue is Xanax.
Where
Yep.
my son went before and he was in a treatment facility, instead of prescribing the benzodiazepines and the anxiolytics, they would prescribe gabapentin and phenobarbital.
Oh, wow. That does not much of an improvement.
So then they get hooked on that, and then
Holy cow.
Yeah, so that's why I have a clouded view of psychiatry, and it's probably a false view.
Yeah.
But for us, it would, and our son knows this too, it would not be an option.
I even called the psychiatrist before he went and explained that he's got a long history of drug use and abuse.
Yeah.
I know you can't tell me anything, but just listen to what I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
My son was in there maybe 10 minutes and walked out with 3 prescriptions.
Yeah, so do you guys hear all that? You got to manage that end of it. They have to manage it. And the truth is, the person who's dealing with this is probably ultimately the person who has to manage it. This is where it gets really hard for family members because, again, you can't control the situation. Even those of us who are counselors and coaches, we can't control the situation. If they go in there and say, I can't, I can barely drive here today. I haven't slept for 4 days. They're probably going to walk out unless you go to certain doctors. And that's where we would encourage you to make a call to us, and we would try to walk you through. And we have a short list that we believe won't do that type of stuff, that kind of thing. But you don't know how that's going to be manipulated and how that's going to be handled by the person when he walks in there.
So if we tell you our personal, if we let you know ahead of time and you know that when you're coaching him, you'll know not to direct him to what, not that he can go on his own.
Yeah, so the question is, we would try to, or the comment is, we would absolutely try to direct them to people. We would automatically, as a default, direct them. Now, there's all kinds of other issues that go into that. You got to also remember there's a shortage of psychiatrists. So there's a shortage of psychiatrists, so you start to get who do I get them into anyway, that kind of thing, which can be very, very frustrating. But yeah, absolutely, like our default would be let's try to stay away from this situation. I've seen people be on different types of medication at different times, to be honest with you. And I've seen people be on medications that you've heard other people say, like, you should never be on those medications. And I've seen it work fine, but they were always very, very invested in their recovery. Does that make sense? Like, they were very deeply invested in their recovery, and there was never a question on, like, they were doing all these other things along with seeing a psychiatrist. And, I've never seen it go well in a circumstance like what you're talking about. And we know this, guys. We all know this instinctively. Certainly the coaches here at Favor know this. We understand what it's like for somebody to try to go to a psychiatrist just to walk out with a prescription of Xanax, because we did it. We did it. I did that. I absolutely did. I had a routine. I would always walk out with pain pills, Xanax, and sleeping pills. And I would be in the doctor's office for 4 minutes, maybe. And I would walk out with that. Every single time. Xanax, sleeping pills, and pain pills. Xanax, sleeping pills, and pain pills. That kind of thing. And, what changed was I got invested in recovery, and I started to change my approach when I see doctors of all kinds, right? All kinds of different doctors, whether it's somebody for a physical issue or a psychiatrist or whatever it might be. My mentality started to change. So we would want to try to get the person. That's why it's both things. See, that's why this is both things, which is actually a really good point, because if you have somebody who's deeply invested in this part of their recovery, it's less likely that they're going to abuse this part of their recovery. The problem is we get people who are only a quarter of the way into this process, and then they jump in over here and they start trying to take care of it with other things. So that's where you got to get, when it says both parts of recovery, that's what we mean. We literally mean both parts of recovery. So, but let's go on the record about anxiety. Let's go on the record about anxiety. Anxiety is a naturally occurring thing that human beings experience. And you can go through life a little bit anxious, and you can learn how to control your anxiety with or without drugs. And there are drugs that you can get that will not get you high. This is the reality of the situation. So you can do this, and a lot of people have to. A lot of people have to learn how to. Some of the statistics say that at least 1 out of 3 Americans will at one point in time need to be treated for anxiety. 33%. Okay? Over a lifetime. Over a lifetime. So, and it's highly likely that people are going to have to learn how to deal with this. And if they don't deal with it, the danger would be what? Let's say, for example, they get into recovery and they're doing well. If they don't deal with it, it increases the likelihood that they might go back to try to self-medicate. And that's what we're looking. So when we talk about it, guys, there's all kinds of difference. There's literally over 300 different mental health disorders in this book. Like literally, give me a minute and I'll find one for each and every one of you. Like literally, like being alive today is a mental disorder. And these are all the different categories. The ones in red are the ones that we see at Favor Greenville, the ones that we've had people walk in the door dealing with. The psychotic disorders are when people are hearing things or hallucinating or have delusions. Bipolar is very, very common that we're dealing with here. Bipolar involves mania, right? Mania, grandiose thinking, don't sleep at night. You feel like you can conquer the world, followed by what? A crash and depression. Depressive disorders, I'll go through some of the criteria, but you're hopeless, the world sucks, you suck, everything sucks, it always will. Suicidal thinking. The anxiety disorders, OCD, we don't see a lot of that, but that's common. Trauma is very, very common in our work. We get a lot of people who are dealing with eating disorders as well. There's sort of like an overlap there. And then, of course, especially with younger people, we have a lot of the impulse control. This is ADHD type stuff. ADHD is an interesting thing. So, ADHD is real too. The overprescription has given a lot of these disorders like a bad name. Like there really is truly such a thing as ADHD. I mean, it's been different neurological tests and things like that. The problem is it's not 25% of the population, right? And it's not 40% of young females on college campuses, right? The way it's given out on college campuses, ADHD medication is a performance-enhancing drug, but it still is a real thing. So, all right, I just want to, and this is why you want to look at it, guys, because this is just some of the stuff that the National Institute for Mental Health, it's just have a substance. This is why you want to be paying attention to this. This is why you want to, look at it. And, anxiety is the most common one. You got to remember, anxiety is not, we hear the word anxiety and we sort of like think that everybody's the same in that regard. There's actually 5 different categories of anxiety. There's panic disorder. So panic disorder is an acute phase. And actually that's why Xanax existed, was for panic disorder, because you could take it in the moment and it would relieve you. And you know what? Your panic wasn't there all day. It tend to come on you. And if you ever had a panic attack, I don't know if anybody here knows what that's like, you literally think you're having a heart attack. You're sweaty, your chest hurts. Obsessive compulsive disorder is you have an obsessive rumination that's relieved by some type of compulsion. So the best example of this is you can't quit thinking about the fact that There are germs everywhere, and so you compulsively wash your hands. That kind of thing. It's not just because you do quirky things. So just because I have to have all the pens lined up in the same direction on my desk doesn't mean I have OCD. It just means I'm weird, man. Now, it would be OCD if doing that was connected to an obsession. Like if I thought I have to have my pens all lined up or I'm going to get in a car accident on the way home, then that would be OCD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is technically an anxiety disorder in the manual. Post-traumatic stress, a terrible thing happens or a series of terrible events, and it affects your quality of life moving forward. The phobias, that's very specific. Agoraphobia, you can't fear the marketplace, you literally can't go outside, that kind of thing. And then this is the most common one, guys. This is actually what it's called. This is what you see everybody diagnosed with. It's called generalized anxiety disorder. So it's just this sort of like never-ending kind of presence of worry, anxiety, discomfort. You know, you guys are probably dealing with it in your situation. You're wondering, is it like warranted because they're out there doing a thing? Or, you know, is this a disorder? So sometimes it's situational in nature. Sometimes you're worried because you have something to worry about. This generalized anxiety disorder, the idea would be it just never goes away. And it's not dependent on circumstances. It's kind of always there. And you'll know you're susceptible to that if you tend to bounce from worry to worry to worry. You know, so how would you know whether this is worry that's situational versus generalized anxiety disorder? If it's generalized anxiety disorder, if the issue that you were worried about gets better, but now you're boom, 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 and you also tend to just bounce. Yeah, and it's everything. So it's not just your kid who's in addiction, it's also your kid who's off of college and you wonder whether or not he's going to make it through, and it's also the car, and oh my God, the car is going to break down, and it's also, work, that kind of thing. So it's just, you literally go from worry to worry to worry. And so I'm not going to go through all these different definitions. Medication does help. We talked about this a little bit already, but it doesn't have to be the benzodiazepines. Remember, benzodiazepines are mood and mind altering and are addictive. So that's the danger around substance use disorder. There are other medications, a lot of the SSRIs, like Prozac, like Luvox, Celexa, those type of things have been shown to be effective. Mental health counseling helps a lot with this. There's a type of therapy called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that helps a lot with anxiety. So this is just the most common one. Any questions about generalized anxiety disorder? Just for interest of kind of getting through, I wanted you, that's by hands down the most common thing we see at Favor Greenville. And it's likely that you guys have heard this about your loved one. The second most common thing is depression. So people will talk about, I'm depressed, or I've been, yes?
The generalized anxiety, my daughter wants to take every little pity party in. Is that part of that? Like,
so she's worried about everything.
Everybody else too, not
yeah.
herself.
Yeah.
But everybody else too.
So this is where, again, it's an inexact science. So like you'd have to talk to somebody who was sort of like a professional and have that evaluated. Is this something else, or is this actually genuine GAD, which again involves that bouncing from person to person and from thing to thing and that obsessive worry about that. It's very, very hard to say for sure. And again, I think what we don't want to do is we don't want to overreact to these things, guys. This is no reason. This isn't the type of thing that would keep a person from getting better. So we don't want to overreact, but we also don't want to underreact and act like it's not something that they should be talking to somebody about. And the truth is, have you ever gone to Barnes & Noble and gone to the self-help section? I mean, that is overwhelming, isn't it? There's 1,000,001 books. You can go and you can get self-help skills training that if you really want to learn how to deal with this, you can actually coach yourself through it. You could coach yourself through, but the problem is that you'd have to be committed to the process, and you'd have to understand it's not going to work like medication. It's not going to work like taking that Xanax. When I take that Xanax, there's a guaranteed result. I'm going to be laid out for the rest of the night. When I do this cognitive behavioral exercise and I identify the irrational thought and I challenge it with a more rational thought, I'm not necessarily going to feel like that immediately. That was good, yes. So now the second one, just to kind of go through real quick, is depression. And the thing I wanted to talk about with depression, and I think this is exceedingly important, there's a continuum where depression is, and a lot of times people say I'm depressed when they're really just sad. Okay? and you have a low mood, you're not feeling it, you know, life just isn't good, it's the blues, right? It used to be called you're blue, that kind of thing, is a lot different than clinical depression. Clinical depression, you can't get out of bed, you have suicidal thinking, you lose a lot of weight or you gain a lot of weight because you're either eating more than you normally do or you're eating less than you normally do. You sleep a lot more than you normally do or you sleep a lot less than you normally do. There's another thing called anhedonia, which is lack of interest in any kind of pleasurable activities. You just don't want to do anything. You can't leave the house. Everything is a chore. That is a heck of a lot different than I'm just feeling down a little bit. And I think that's where it gets really problematic because this person over here, this person who's laid up in bed, has got to see somebody. They've got to be, this is necessary. Whereas GAD we might be able to get through, this person has to see somebody. You guys get that? Depression takes on a different level because of the risk of suicide. This is just the facts. So, you know, that's where we talk about these different kind of like, so normal mood is I'm sad. Abnormal mood, which is technically called dysphoria, which is also diagnosable, but it's not quite as intense, is I'm sad, but it sort of sticks around and it's there forever kind of stuff. When it gets really, really difficult, it involves some of the suicidal thinking and also that feeling of hopelessness. And literally what's called the cognitive triad, which is I suck, the world sucks, and it always will. So there's a theme that people go through whenever you talk to them and they're dealing with that. And that's what you want to get, you know, it's pervasive, it doesn't go away. It's going to require some type of medical intervention. Medication works with this, talk therapy works with this, people get better, but they tend to not get better if they don't get treated. And this is a big deal for us, especially for men. There's a book, if you're dealing with a loved one, if you're dealing with a son or a husband or whatever, there's a book called, this says, the title is I Don't Want to Talk About It. And it's all about male depression. And basically, what are men told to do with their feelings? What are we supposed to do? Suck it up, dude. Be John Wayne. We're allowed to express one emotion, and what is it? Anger. We're allowed to punch holes in drywall. Okay? But sadness, hopelessness, fear, all those things that make us weak, you stuff it, you stuff it, you stuff it, and that's what you got to get people. So that's what you want to be focusing on the depression spectrum. Does that make sense? And, you know, sometimes you have to, these are just some of the symptoms. Did that thing just make that noise? I didn't even know that was in there, man. That's pretty freaking cool. So there's a range of symptoms. A lot of these things you guys have probably heard about: worthlessness, guilt, sleep disturbance. This mood variation, just basically you're up and down. It's also called a labile mood, loss of energy. Let's see if it makes another sound. Yeah, boy! I'm taking my PowerPoint to a next level type thing. Impaired workability, you know, it starts to affect your life. Again, if you're asking yourself, is this a low mood versus depression, these are some of the things that you're starting to see. You know, it's starting to express, it's starting to definitely affect their life. You know, you feel like you're sludging through life, like you're dragging yourself through. Pessimism, people say I'm better off dead, thoughts of suicide, that kind of thing. Man, I did not do this, obviously. So these are just some of the things that can sort of push you to that point. Because remember, there is a biological kind of like genetic factor to this. There's sort of like an organic factor, but also situations can push you into that. Some of the most obvious ones would be losses, right? You just can't recover from that. You know, stressful life events can push you there. I've shared in here what went on with me in over the last 8 weeks. Losing my brother-in-law, dealing with some stuff with my daughter, that kind of stuff, trying to figure out where we're going to go, like super stressful stuff that if I don't manage it right, can floor me, right? It can, not just me, but anybody. It's the body's response, and your body, you shut down, and it can become very, very problematic, a cycle in the wrong direction. And these are just, I'm not going to go through all the specific This is ridiculous, actually. I do want to talk about one thing real quick. Yeah, this is silly. Where is it? Let's see. I want to talk about one thing around helping people with this. So these are alternative treatments because we're running out of time. I wanted to throw this up here. You guys are going to hear all about the therapy stuff. You're going to hear about the medication. You're going to hear about talk therapy, that kind of thing. There are other things that people can incorporate in their life, and we always want to highlight the fact that, like, you know, I'm not familiar with acupuncture or aromatherapy, but I am very familiar with breathing exercise and prayer and meditation, nutrition and diet. Look, man, there's no one on the planet that is eating a worse diet than me right now. No one. And it is definitely affecting my mood. My wife is in Pennsylvania right now because of some of this stuff we're dealing with losing my brother-in-law, and she's going to be there for a while. You want to know what I ate today? I ate a pack of M&Ms and a cookie. And that's all I'll eat. And I don't know what I'll do on the way home. I'll probably stop at Burger King. And so that can affect my mood. You can say whatever you want, but it definitely will affect your mood. So these are the kind of things that people can start to learn about too, because people might not be invested in doing some of the other stuff. And when we get into this idea of like, is medication, I guess what I want to convey is there are different ways to attack this problem. All right, so I'm going to respect your time, guys. This is awesome. We will be back. I will be doing a lecture 2 weeks from today. We're back here again next Monday, and it'll be an open share. It'll kind of be like a group discussion. If you haven't checked out that group, please do. I also wanted to share a couple things real quick. We have our hotline cards. Okay, so a lot of times after a group like this, people have questions, that kind of thing. I would encourage you to take this card and you make this phone call. These folks are favored recovery coaches trained by me, and they will take your call and talk you through it and walk you through it, that kind of thing. I am not the best person to help y'all with those situations. There was a time when I was, but guys, I travel so much right now for the organization, and we're so deep into some other projects that we have going on that I am literally disconnected with some of the referral process and some of that stuff. So you want to talk to the coaches that are doing this every day. So thank you for being here tonight. We're going to close this thing with the Serenity Prayer. So if we get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members brought to this no choice of their own, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, good deal. Thank you very much, guys.